So welcome to my meeting. I originally was inviting you guys to join me for a talk called Making the Most of Pluto. But when I set about to start making my notes for this meeting, just to try to jot down a couple of simple bullet points to get started, I ended up sitting down and just writing out everything that wanted to be said. I sometimes when I'm sitting down with the chart, I'll just ask it, what do you want me to know? What do you want to be said? And so I didn't even have to ask Pluto. I started writing, and then he just kind of wouldn't shut up. So I'm presenting to you guys what I was given to share. And let me know, chime in, of course, if you have any questions along the way. So I just thought it made sense to title what I had written here as Pluto the Psychopomp and the Ongoing Birthing Process of the Soul. And I'll explain what a psychopomp is here shortly. And forgive me, I'm gonna, since whenever I write sometimes, I do channel through writing. And so it feels like most alignment with truth whenever I just go ahead and read to you guys what I had written that came out in a place of clarity rather than trying to paraphrase it for you. So I will be doing a little bit of reading along of the slides. So Pluto is the god of the underworld. Themes of Pluto have to do with death as well as what is below the surface. So secrets, hidden agendas by way of manipulation, unconscious desires, and ultimately the underlying karmic impulses behind our actions and the experiences that we attract. Pluto has a transformative energy, which is why it is connected, concerned with death, as death is a transformative state. The god of the underworld, as well as other beings who deal with such transformative states, are known as psychopomps. A psychopomp is defined as, this is the Greek definition, a guide of souls to the place of the dead, but it comes from the Greek root words pompos, which is a conductor or guide, and psyche, which is breath, life, soul, or mind. Psychopomps are also associated with guiding souls through transitions in life in general, and guiding a new consciousness to this plane to be birthed, and birthing people into new consciousness. So just transitional and transformative states in general. Pluto is a psychopomp. Pluto's evolution. It is a symbolic death of the ego, but also the birth of the oversoul. As a psychopomp, it aids in the transformative state from one to the other. This process is what we define as rebirth, as our consciousness evolves, as in births, between states from ego-centered state to a soul-centered state. So I want to take an aside here to offer the best definition of the ego that I know, based on my own experiences and teachings. A soul comes into the world vulnerable and not quite able to engage with the types of karmic complexes and levels of unconsciousness of the other beings here that it encounters. This plane is very dense compared to where it is coming from, and so the soul has to attune to where it is. This begins in the home, with mother and father, with family and the sign of Cancer. The soul as a baby is not yet able to distinguish between self and other. It encounters the energy of others, especially parents, as if it were its own. It confuses their belief structures for its own. It is coming from a place where it knows itself to be love itself and does not feel separation from source, and into a dimension where karmic complexes rule the day. As souls are working here through the pains of their perceived separation from source, in an effort of self-preservation, the soul puts up defenses in the form of its own defense mechanisms. Much of these are developed based on the caregiver's own defenses. These defenses and conditionings, karmic complexes, and the way that they inform the personality act as a buffer from the outside world and from the intensity of feeling of all of it at once. This creates a shell around the soul, which is the ego. This is also the shell of the crab in Cancer, as a sign where ego begins to form. The soul then continues the birthing process onto this plane by processing its way through this shell, a little at a time. As it makes its way through each complex, a little more of the soul is able to take the reins from the ego to come into fuller light. With this process, the higher self, the oversoul, is slowly creating an ability to inhabit a body on this plane. The ego acts as a surrogate and represents the places where we had needed to slow down, to stunt the birthing process of the soul, because the full light of the soul would break down under the density of the karma of this planet. That is why we need this shell as a buffer, like an eggshell or surrogate womb. It is the stuntedness that makes the ego like a child, which is Leo. When we see others' complexes, we see where their child selves have been stunted and remain immature as we raise these parts of ourselves up into spiritual adulthood. The very process of this is the gradual birth of the oversoul onto this plane. And this all does very much connect to Pluto. I'm getting there from around the edges, but this is all relevant setup to what I wanted to teach about Pluto. So Pluto aids us in this process and the death of the ego, piece by piece, as we evolve into spiritual beings, our higher selves embodied. So looking at this as a progression through the chart, through the signs, the second quarter of the chart in general, signs 4 through 6, have to do with the development of the ego. In the fourth house, Cancer, the soul begins to develop complexes in relationship to the immediate family and surroundings in reaction to its sense of emotional security or lack thereof. In the fifth house, Leo, it develops a sense of self based on projecting itself onto the outside world and the feedback or validation that it receives for its efforts in return and being witnessed. In the sixth house, Virgo, the soul becomes self-critical of any aspects of the ego that have developed through shallow concerns. It wants for the work that it's doing in the world to be of service, to make a real contribution to something meaningful. All of the self-gratifying egoic concerns up to that point begin to ring hollow, and the soul becomes more self-reflective. So this primes us to enter the third quarter of the chart. In the third quarter of the chart, the ego begins to reflect on others, not just self. In the seventh house, Libra. But because it is coming from a more self-focused area of development, it gets its sense of others mingled with self through projections based on its interpretations that are influenced by its complexes and defense mechanisms, especially with regard to mother and father, and projects these themes onto others. This brings us to the eighth house, Scorpio, where Pluto the psychopomp reigns. Here, in order for us to truly see ourselves and others, we have to push through these complexes. Since this means the death of the ego and the birthing of the oversoul, these complexes are challenged. They no longer serve us and must be removed in order to make room for the true self to operate. The ego attempts to resist this process by clinging to a sense of control, to hold on to power, as the developing of complexes in part began due to a sense of deep vulnerability that these complexes provided a false sense of power over and safety from. Therefore, the ego tries to resist. As a fixed sign, it clings. It clings to what it thinks it knows out of a need for security. It clings to personality. It is due to this resistance and the suffering that this resistance causes that the sign of Scorpio and the energies of Pluto get a bad rap. Suffering equals resistance. I learned the meaning of this very acutely during childbirth, during the profound process of birthing a soul from the womb onto the three-dimensional plane, where it will learn to inhabit its own body. The labor contractions that take place are an incredible pulse of energy that completely and painfully overwhelm the mother. Leading up to and during my own labor, I kept receiving the message that suffering is resistance and resistance is suffering. I had heard about women experiencing intense pleasure and even orgasms during the birthing process, and Spirit was telling me that the difference between the two scenarios was directly tied to the resistance of these intense birthing forces. I was not able to come fully into non-resistance during my own labor, but about 2 months after my son was born, I suddenly began experiencing these contractions and deep labor pains again, as Spirit seemed to have wanted me to have another chance to move through this. And I was able to feel what it was like to shift this feeling from pain to pleasure through non-resistance. This experience stayed with me always as an example of resistance and suffering as one. In Scorpio, the ego resists handing the reins to the oversoul. Pluto, the psychopomp, then puts on one transformative opportunity after another in front of us, so that we can evolve through the birthing and embodying of this oversoul. It can give us small chances with simple tasks for change, and evolution can happen in deep ways through even small chances. And then these opportunities become more and more severe if we continue to ignore them or resist them. Simply put, the level of suffering that you feel due to Pluto's influence is equal to the level of resistance to its influence. Opportunities for growth and evolution can be put into one's path, and one can feel pain in the process, but still not have to suffer. The consciousness of the oversoul does not judge an experience as bad and is accepting of what is as God. The ego resists because it sees things through the lens of its defenses, not seeing it as God. Our path that Pluto carves out, when approached from the consciousness of acceptance, paves the way for the transformation to take place and for integration to occur. This transformation of consciousness and understanding also paves the way for the soul to fully embark on the themes of Sagittarius and the ninth house with regard to seeing the bigger picture, the higher meanings and divine order and natural law of the universe. Higher education begins here as we move from our egoic childhood and into the adulthood of the 10th house, Capricorn archetype. I want to clarify that at any point in any area of the chart, the extent to which the ego gives the reins to the oversoul elevates the ego into a more conscious interface with this realm. But this does not necessarily mean that the ego outright dies, as it is a symbolic death. The ego over time, as we raise it up into higher and clearer states of consciousness, is no longer steering the ship, but can be along for the ride from a healthy vantage point and continue to grow up until it is no longer needed and is merged into our being and given over to our own unique archetypal imprint that we interface with the world through, defining our dharma. At this point, the ego has been fully transformed and evolved. We do not at this point become void of individuality or personality. Rather, the personality is evolved into a fully expressed personal archetype. And I put this picture up here to remind me to share with you a recent experience that I had in the springtime. I felt called south from my home and to Mount Shasta, where I was sitting in meditation. And I was connecting with whatever was there and inviting me to come. And as I opened to it, it was really interesting. I completely felt and saw myself as an energetic being. And I saw that to actually be a mandala. So I could see, it's like a gyrating, moving mandala, geometric imprint inside of me extending out into my environment. And I saw everything else in the environment as its own mandalas. And I realized that this is our ability to vibrate and resonate with this and move through the world as this is our unique imprint, that we're all mandalas. So whenever we are able to walk the earth as this, we are able to harmonize with and vibrate with the things that we come into contact with more fully. Whenever it's the outer shell is blocking this, the ego and personality is blocking this from fully expressing itself, it kind of slows it down. It's a moving, gyrating thing, but this it muddies it, I guess. It makes it a little bit murky. It's a little bit dulled. It's not quite as crisp. It's not quite as clear. And so whenever I opened to this and I felt myself being in my own fullness, expressing myself in that moment, achieving a state of fullness with my own archetype, I was able to then receive updates. And that mandala became more complicated. It became more detailed. It became brighter. It was vibrating in a much more pure sense. So that's what now I've taken that with me to see that that's what each person is striving to achieve, that they're striving to achieve with this work, and through Pluto's help, to be able to vibrate their own personal mandalas much more fully. Was there any questions at this point before I move on? Okay. So just to summarize those concepts that I was wanting to bring out before moving on to application. When looking at the ways a person is experiencing any sign or planetary dynamic in their chart, I always see any struggle with any dynamic as a symptom of its divinely ordained potential being blocked. And I would say that mandala that would reside in each of us, that comes out to express through each of us, is the energy that's being blocked. So seeing the blocking of this energy is simply showing us where the current ego structure is stunting or slowing down consciousness. The chart in this way, and in seeing how we are interfacing with this energies at any given moment, is our roadmap to the birthing of our oversoul into full consciousness. While I apply this to all signs, it is specifically Scorpio and Pluto where our greatest strength and support lie in taking this crucial step of transformation and evolution from ego to oversoul, and to experiencing the chart from its most divine vantage point, as the point of rebirth into a more fully conscious and embodied experience of the world, which is the next step of evolution for the inhabitants of this planet as a whole. When looking at Pluto in the chart, you see the themes that your oversoul has been applying pressure to your ego over in effort to evolve. Certain themes can take many lifetimes, which is why a soul will be born under parents that already exhibit some of the same themes of karmic entanglements and complexes that the soul has been working on, as an imprint that is supportive of the soul and picking up from where the ego structure left off from. The themes of Pluto in the chart will already feel very familiar on a deep soul level. We can figure out where we are in the process with these themes based on seeing how much we resist them, how much we suffer around them, and the effects of this resistance in our lives. To shift this energy, it is important to remember that Pluto can introduce painful scenarios, but these scenarios can support us in many ways, and that we do not get the same benefit from them when we resist versus approaching them from a place of acceptance. Even if it means feeling the pain of a scenario, let the pain transform you. I call them growing pains. So I'm going to let you guys see me now when I talk about this. I'm hoping that my video doesn't break up or anything like we were having troubles with before, but this next piece is just so personal that it feels wrong to talk through a still image about it. But I'm going to give an example from my own life of this put into effect. So the difference between pain and suffering can be hard to explain, but it is an important distinction. I will try to teach this distinction using an example from my life. My sister died in July of this past summer while Pluto was squaring itself in my chart and transiting Jupiter in close orb to my natal Uranus, which is in Scorpio in my chart and squaring my nodes. It was sudden and unexpected, in keeping with the shock of Uranus in Scorpio, expanded by Jupiter, though this was very much a Pluto-Scorpio themed event. Leading up to this event, I had another experience that was a precursor to this in preparation. This was in late April. During this prior event, Pluto and Mars were conjunct and both squaring my natal Pluto. It was an initiation into the transformative event to come, with Mars on my Pluto there initiating that. So this is a picture of my sister and her two little boys. And I was expecting, just knowing the transits that were happening for me this summer, I was completely and fully expecting a transformative experience, and I was expecting for it to be shocking. And there's only so much that you can expect around that, because you know that it's going to be something that you wouldn't be able to guess. And so this was it. And but if I will say that I did have this precursor event really did pave the way for me to be able to integrate this experience, so that I was really ready for it when it happened, as much as I could have been. And that's the thing with Pluto, is that it gives you chances when you're listening to Pluto, and you're integrating what it gives you, and you can take it in the doses that it gives you. When you take your medicine, even when medicine can be a little bit bitter, when you take those doses as they're given, it's the medicine that you need, and it will get you where you need to go when you're able to accept Pluto's help and accept that the things that it's putting in your path, it's, when it comes to understanding the difference between free will versus karma versus divine will and all that, I've developed this, you know, understanding and practice with myself where I always concede to my highest good. But that means trusting that my oversoul, you know, my higher self knows the plan and that she's negotiating on my behalf. If something, you know, is happening karmically that, that I'd like to shift, you know, or if there's something that's playing out or some events that are playing out in my life that, that I wonder like, do I need to go through this thing all the way? It seems like this was a predestined thing, but at what point do I get my lessons and I get out of here? Sometimes she can negotiate on my behalf. Sometimes I can ask her, you know, to check back in with the divine forces and help to, you know, set up a cleaner path out. Like, so there is negotiating that can happen, but there's some things that are just really set up that can't necessarily be negotiated. And it's our ability and our willingness to go through those things that will help us to receive the most benefit from it. And our level of resistance is going to keep us from really being able to integrate. And in this particular event, what happened to me in April was that I had a pet die, and it on the surface wouldn't have been such a big event. You know, the death of a pet, it can be a lot to process, but there was just so many cosmic forces that were aligning around this particular event with this particular pet passing the way that she did. And I was struggling with whether or not to put her to sleep because she was having a somewhat painful and drawn out death process. And it occurred to me just to ask her, you know, how she wanted to go and if she wanted to be put to sleep. For me to have to make that choice on her behalf to end her life didn't feel right. And so my guidance at that time was that she was choosing to die at her own pace. She was choosing to not be put down. She knew that she was dying, but that she just wanted love through it. And so my job at that point became to hold her, because she only wanted to be held, to hold her while she was suffering for days, and to for myself to take that time and all of those hours of and patience of holding her to get right in my heart with what was happening, because I felt like the need to do something, that I had to do something about it somehow. I had to alleviate her pain somehow, that I wasn't doing it right if she was suffering, and that wasn't mine to do. It wasn't mine to take away from her. It was my job to hold her, and it was my job to love her, and that was it. And so I received a lot of guidance during the process in how to just best support myself and her through it by taking away the burden of myself to feel that I was thinking that there was anything wrong with what was happening, that death was wrong in any way. And I have a good relationship with death in general. And I do work as a psychopomp myself, and that's been a part of my life forever, and a very active part of my life for the past few years. So the fact that I was noticing that I still somehow had a problem with being present for death, was a surprise to me. But I was being shown that to not resist it, to come into a place of full acceptance and full love, and that from a place of full acceptance and full love, the compassionate heart could do its job, and that all that was needed was compassion. Whenever she did pass, I took her out on a hike to a really beautiful setting under a waterfall, and I buried her with a crystal and a mandala that I had made. It's a part of my artwork, and you can see behind me, this is one of my pieces too. I like to make these tapestries. So I buried her with one, and when I was finished, on my way back, I stopped at a bridge over another fall, and I could just feel so much intensity hitting me from the waterfall and the negative ions. And there was something that was happening I needed to sit with and open up to. And it ended up just this really wild energy, this really intense and loving energy just flooded me. And it cleared out blocks that I had in my ability to grieve. And if I hadn't been fully present through this process, fully present with what it was, without judgment, and that was the lesson for me with this pet, was to come to a place of complete non-judgment. And if I hadn't done that, I think I would have missed out on so much transformation. As this energy moved through me, it moved obstacles that I had to grief. And I didn't realize that I had blocked up my ability to grieve. I had prior lifetimes as a healer where I was meant to care for these communities that were wiped out during a time when pagan communities were experiencing that. And I had been, I was just so taken with my ability to not be able to help them that I had locked up my ability to heal with my ability to grieve and a fear of trying. And so that's something that that really opened up for me and showed itself to me. And as I felt that move away from me and I felt those blocks move, I realized this whole time there had been nothing for me to do. The invitation was for me to just let all of these things happen. I didn't have to control it. All I had to do was be present. That is all I had to do. And there's just so much that moved through this place of presence that I was guided into. And then it was about a month later that I got the call that my sister had died, and it was very unexpected. It was very sudden, and it was just a huge shock, to say the least. She was 41 years old, and as I was sitting in the shock of it and just really feeling this, the depth of this, really just the profound depth of this realization that this had happened, my guides were really, really quick to come and sit by my side and to remind me of what I had just learned, and that had been working up to this. And if I hadn't stayed present, I wouldn't have been able to handle this moment the way that I did, just to deepen into it. And yes, feel the shock of it, and yes, feel the pain of it. But this became just a deep experience for me in feeling the difference between pain and suffering. It was painful, but whenever I felt myself going into a place of fighting with my reality, fighting the reality that she had died, or being mad at it in any way, saying that she was too young, anytime I felt myself going into any stories around this shouldn't have happened, or, how could this have happened? Why didn't she go to the doctor in time? She knew something was wrong, but she hadn't checked and kept putting it off. If only this, if only that. Anytime I went into any kind of stories like that, I would suffer. The suffering would come, and the quality of my tears would change instantly. And whenever I would put those things aside and just be with acceptance with what had been put in front of me, and also the fact that I had been primed for this experience, really was a gift too, to help me trust that what was happening was something bigger, and trust that it wasn't just some accident, And when I was able to really sit with that and the level of acceptance that I had been primed to experience it with, I still cried, but my tears were productive. They were very productive, and I just felt so much deep energy moving. And then beyond this, whenever I went out with my family in Oklahoma to bury my sister, to put her to rest and to be with the family, I kept getting the message that there wasn't anything for me to do, because I kept feeling like I needed to go out and rescue everybody. I'd have to manage all these details. I wanted to move into action, and I kept being told, my job right now is to love, and yes, I can help out, but stop trying to take it over from everyone. Just show up and just love. And from that place of non-judgment, acceptance of it, open-heartedness, my heart was able to do so much more from a place of compassion and being with the people that I loved. The energy was able to move so much more fully, because it wasn't being blocked up by my ego. The stories of it shouldn't have happened, that was my ego, the part of me that knows better. Whenever I just conceded to that, everything was able to make sense, even if I didn't know why she had to die. But as I continued to stay open with it, more was able to reveal itself. And I'll share with you too that my sister and I, we grew up in a really in a household that was really intense, and there was a lot. She and I both took on a lot of family karma, and there was a lot of deep ancestral karma that we have been burdened with. And going back and seeing my family and my mother and my father, just the first time, it being the three of us, there was a huge change, obviously with her not being there anymore, but it was the realization that suddenly the karma was gone. And this whole lifetime of working on it and trying to work on it directly, it left whenever I allowed. And I realized the gift of what my sister had done, that this was all meant to be, and she took everything with her. She took it with her when she left. And my parents, I just saw them in a new way. They saw each other in new ways. They saw themselves in new ways. It's been a really transformative experience in my family, to see all of that suddenly gone. And the bigger lesson was that I just had to allow it to go. If I had tried to rationalize what was happening, if I tried to attach any stories to it, I would have been hooking onto it. I would have been giving it a reason to stay. I would have been given new karmas to have to work out, the pain of losing a sister. And as it stands, it continues to be a transformative experience. And there was a moment whenever I had gone into the woods, when I got back home, I hiked into the middle of the woods to sit by a river for a few days and just stare at a fire, and to integrate everything. And while I was there, I was still had the question of, why she had left a little bit. I wasn't crying, but I was just open to the answer. And what was offered was a question. And the question pried me for the answer. And the question was given to me: what does her name mean? Well, her name is Christy. And when I sat with that, I was like, oh, Christy. Yeah, what does her name mean? And then I was all of a sudden shown Christ. That without, giving my sister quite that high of a pedestal to say, oh yes, she was Christ. That was what she did there. All of a sudden I understood it as having died for our sins, and I'll give her that, because I felt it. And that's real. And whenever I open up to accepting that, and I accept the answer that it was given, that she died for our family sins, she took all of these things with her, in ways that I don't understand, but I don't have to. Trying to understand it just, gets my ego involved, and it creates, complexes that I don't want. But when I opened to what was in front of me, all of a sudden she became the forest, and she became everything. And I was just surrounded in her presence. And I walked through the trees, and I was walking through her, just hearts linked. And so I offer this, as a deeply, deeply personal experience, but a profound experience of Pluto at work in my chart, my word. This all happening during Pluto squaring my natal Pluto. And so, these Pluto transits, while they can be really hard, my example that I offer is one of approaching these from a place of total and utter acceptance. And I live here as a testament that it can be done. So I want to offer that. And so I think moving along goes into some charts now. And let me just check the time. So we have about 20 minutes left and 4 charts. And so I'm going to take a minute to set a timer for 5 minutes each. And give me just a moment. I promise I don't want to go over this time. So now we have 5 minutes set, and our first volunteer is Julia. Really quick, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to pop out and share that, and then we'll get going. Any questions? I just spilled my guts, so don't be afraid, if you have anything you want to ask or share yourselves. Okay, then. So we'll move on to Julia then. Are you there, Julia?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, hi there.
Hi, and thank you for sharing the experience that you had. I think that was very moving, and it was
Yeah.
also very instructive in teaching about non-resistance.
Thank you. I appreciate you saying so. Um, yeah, so if I'm able to take anything forward from that, you know, it's definitely this. So I'm glad to be here and getting to share. Thank you for that. And I did write down some notes, but really quick, if you wanted to just share why it is that you felt called to sign up for the talk, what it is that, how you experience Pluto in a way that you maybe are already understand and are wanting to indulge more in, or maybe questions that you have that caused you to sign up for the talk, for volunteering.
I've realized that this life is, I've termed it as breaking wheels. So there's a lot of wheels that have been going on in terms of relationships with parents. It's interesting you've got that there, because I was a black sheep of the family. I was the odd person out. And the whole idea being to really focus on breaking my responsibility to fulfill the expectations of parents, of, you know, of what others thought. So I'm trying to take back control of my own expression, my own life, my own existence, which, you know, throughout my childhood, and even up to about 2 years ago, was pretty much denied. Like, my voice was almost non-existent.
Right. So yeah, I was going to ask too about, well, what you said about your voice being non-existent. I noticed your Mercury is actually right next to your sun, which could imply that there's, you know, somebody being seen for what they have to say and being seen for their voice. But when it's that close, it's actually something that's called being combust. So it's almost like the full light of the sun burns it up in a way. It's like the sun is too bright, and it blocks some of the light of that planet. But that stood out to me, but also not necessarily in a way that is ultimately negative, and there's ways to access that. I just wondered if that might be something that you struggled with a little bit. If you wanted to say more about that. Yeah.
Oh yes. The only thing I can add to that, and you're absolutely right, the only thing I can add to that is, as long as I was speaking for someone else, people would hear me. But if I was speaking for myself, it's like, you know, I was either exaggerating or I was bullshitting. And it got to the point where, you know, there was a point where I was ready to walk away from some fairly significant relationships. And that was that threat or promise, depending on what side of the fence you're on, that was heard.
Yeah. Just so interesting too, what you're saying, and you probably already know this, but for the sake of the lesson, you know, it's in Sagittarius, which can be very much connected to boasting, to overemphasizing or exaggerating things, and that just, or even lying a little bit. But that's one part of the Sagittarian archetype. And based on what I was saying before, you know, that just shows when anytime an archetype is being expressed through its more negative values, that shows that there's something about there that's being blocked. And so I have a lot of respect for what you said, that you saw that was happening. It sounds to me like you're saying you saw that was happening and didn't, whatever was happening in the environment or the relationships that was instigating that desire to do that, felt unhealthy. So you're choosing to go in a different direction. Does that sound accurate?
Yes,
Yeah.
that is correct. And
Yeah.
I heard your timer go off. I just wanted to let you know that my father is a Capricorn, and
Okay.
he denied that I was even his child, and he was not involved in my upbringing. So I was very interesting about the Pluto the Pluto and the Capricorn relationship in there. But thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Oh yeah, for sure. I just want to say that it sounds like you have a compass that you're following. And so, and you know, I started off a little slow on your chart, so I still want to offer what I had to say, which is that whenever I look at your chart, I didn't have to see much to validate this. I just looked at your Pluto and I said, boom, you're a psychopomp. So I don't know what kind of experience that you have with that. I was curious to know how you communicate with the other side, so to speak, because there is a connection there, and it feels like it's something that bleeds out onto here, that the work that you're doing here in your evolutionary process and following that compass and following your edge of growth and following the track that spirit lays in front of you based on what feels right and what doesn't, and going toward what feels right, that work that you're doing is transforming more than just yourself. And so that might be something that that during the process that you find you're actually changing things around you, you're changing other people in your life, you're transforming energies yourself, and it might be something that you will eventually do more consciously and take on in a much more active way. And so feel free to reach out to me, you know, personally, you know, message me or whatever if you want to know any more about that. It's something that I have a lot of experience with, and so I recognize the fellow psychopomp. And if that's if there's any more that you want to maybe go into about that, feel free to talk to me afterward. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome, for sure. All right. So let's reset this timer for 4 minutes. Sorry, guys. So for volunteer, how do I pronounce this name? I don't want to say it wrong.
Hello.
Hi there.
Hi.
Is it yell is in yellow ferret? Is that?
Yes, right. Yes.
Okay, beautiful. Did you want to share why how you experienced Pluto and what your interest was for volunteering?
I certainly, as I learned my chart, I can see experiences in my life that very clearly reflect the aspects of Pluto, and they have been transformative, but I wanted to understand more about it, especially as Pluto's conjunct the North Node. And I do feel that well, even if I just looked at the third house, it's an important area of my life, and it hasn't developed as I would want it to.
Mm-hmm. Right. Do you work as an astrologer? Or is that a path that you've been following?
Not fully professional, but I have been studying for nearly 30 years, and I go through phases of reading lots of charts for people, and then it fades out of my life again and I do other things.
Yeah. Do you do any other kind of metaphysical type of work?
I would say that I do some support healing type work, and yeah, I do call in help and other dimensions, and I do know that I have been able to have a very positive impact and help other people on their paths and be transformative.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I wrote down here in my notes that it feels just from your chart that time would be a bit blurry for you, as far as how much of what you experience is just feels really open to other lifetimes. Have you had much recall or experience with past life recall, or have anything like that come up?
Yes, earlier in my life, when I was much younger, I went through regressions, and I talked to people who read it, and all of those experiences were so powerfully resonant, because I'd have ideas or experiences or feelings and not be quite sure why I felt that way so intensely, and then those stories have become just explain things to me in a way that was reassuring and healing. And also I can be in and even by myself, I've been in places where I can only call it it's like an electricity about the place, or to know streets that know the streets, know the buildings, or an experience with cultures that are not part of my this lifetime, and to feel an incredible sense of at homeness, or even to be in a museum and find myself crying in front of artifacts and think, oh my goodness, to just feel like I'm coming home. Actually, it's happened before. There seems to, now I wasn't brought up in a Jewish tradition.
Excuse me, Elle.
But,
excuse me.
Yes.
I'm just going to have to step in here a little bit and just say that we are running out of time, and if you could please keep your feedback very short.
Okay.
I apologize. I think I do this to myself, where I get so nervous about talking to you guys about your charts, and then it's like, oh, I'm so nervous to be on the spot, and then I don't save enough time. So I think I go on a little, and I should stop doing that, because once I'm here, I just want to talk about your chart. But I love everything that you're saying, and I just wanted to offer, I do have to move on, but all of that past life stuff, there's so much that you brought in with for you in this lifetime, and it feels like it's all available to you. And so I wanted to give you the advice to, like, you need to anchor yourself, not to get lost in the everythingness of it, from ninth house, from that higher perspective, or getting lost in the deep pit of the eighth house, that there's so much from here to here that you're holding, and to know that all that's available to you. But Pluto's your anchor. It's in the third house in Virgo for you. It's just all about harnessing the tools and applying them practically in a way that that you can logically make more sense of. It makes it a much more accessible and attainable for you. So I wanted to offer that before moving on. Thank you so much. Did you have any last questions?
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, feel free to reach out afterwards too. I feel bad for leaving too little time. So for Mimi, are you there, Mimi?
Hi, yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Okay.
Do you have a little bit that you want to share about your chart?
Oh, well, we don't have much time, do we? So, basically, I feel that in my life, I've been going through a lot of Plutonic or Scorpionic transformations, and well, I just wanted to have your feedback on that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'll read you what I wrote. I asked your chart, what do you want me to know? It said there's also a little bit of an aspect of blurriness with time, and that it feels like it's actually bringing a heightened opportunity for projection into current relationships relative to past experiences. And I was wondering how you experience relationship in this lifetime, if you wouldn't mind answering. And if it's too personal, my apologies.
I would have to go too much into detail right now with that. And we don't really have much time. I think there is another 1 or 2 volunteers, so I don't want to take up their times.
You're kind. There's one more. So I just wrote that Pluto is creating a little bit of an impulsiveness around relationship in the first house there. And that might be something that you feel could potentially get you into trouble from time to time, but that ultimately is there for a reason. It's meant to push you through to something, and that stagnation is just not an option. And so it's just like you have to kind of get to it, but being mindful of the fact that there is a lot of blurriness and bleeding from past life stuff that your current relationships could look like a reflection of, but might not be fully in that relationship. And so the key to finding balance with that, so that you can meet others authentically without having to work through too much of your own older stuff with it. And I had said that I saw this dynamic could present a lot of opportunity for growing pains, so to know yourself in deeper ways through the process, you're meant to know yourself in deeper ways through this process. And it's a very personal experience to you. But emotions that you feel pave the way for higher understanding around the dynamics and higher meaning. And I'm getting that from from your, where was I getting that from? So I'm getting that because your Venus is the ruler of your Pluto in the 4th house in Sagittarius. So that's, for me, just like the most simple, obvious thing that stood out for me is like, yes, higher meaning, your emotions, they're giving you the path. And so it's about looking for balance, and Libra is coming into balance too. So finding an emotional balance through emotional understanding will support finding a place of more support and equilibrium in relationship with other. And then also it seems like your mind is a really strong tool for you as well, but that not to let your mind be the driving force, that let the mind be the administrator for these other things that are happening. Mm-hmm. I hope that any of that felt relevant or helpful.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. So for Kimberly, and we have about 3 minutes. Are you there, Kimberly?
Yes, I am.
Okay. It's funny, I recognize you from past meetings. I didn't put the face with the name before, but when I looked at your chart, the first thing I almost wrote, and I was shy to write it, the first thing I almost wrote was, I think she's really beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
I feel really validated because I'm like, oh, it's you. You're so beautiful. But what I was getting from your chart is that there's a strong empowerment, for you that feels available around your femininity. Is that something that resonates for you?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And Pluto being at the forefront of that, there's like a claiming of feminine power, and something that you're doing for women everywhere, at this time and place on the earth and the movements that we're going through, almost fiercely, or not almost entirely fiercely. So I've said that Venus and Mars are big instigators for you. Pluto is in an intercepted sign, which means that it's working through kind of a backdoor way, with Venus and Mars being out there doing a lot of its work for it, with Venus being the ruler of Pluto, but also Mars squaring it. And that, Mars is a bit of an agitator anyway, but squaring Pluto especially, it's like I think of the squares as like the agitation that you get from the rubbing of the plates under the earth, where it can create an earthquake, but it also builds mountains, And so there's something that agitation, that impetus, to that fight is really building something meaningful that will create a higher vantage point to stand atop of. I wrote that, and also, sextiling Lilith on your ascendant. So that feels like that's got to be a really strongly felt, force for you. Lilith being a really powerful, vivacious, feminine archetype. So I wrote that you likely will not like the perception of being controlled by anyone. And so feminine power and themes around equality at the forefront. And this could lead to a little bit of trouble when it comes to an impulse to fight perceived injustices or constraints. But taking a minute to look at the bigger picture helps to apply spiritual discernment to situations when deciding how to respond from a balanced perspective. And we're right at time. I'm just wondering if you had any quick comments or question before we end the meeting.
No, you're right. You're right on. I've been very much focusing, especially this year, on, women's power, but I'm also very, like you said, I think about it. It's very strategic, and but it's feeling more and more important. The you know, the women's empowerment movement and all that, and what my role is in that. So yeah, thank you very much. Your insight was beautiful.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it feels like a strong role. It feels like you're in your element, you know? And so bless you and thank you for doing the work. Whatever it is you're doing, bless you for doing it.
Melanie, thank you. Any final words on this topic, Melanie, before we wind down?
No, just that if anybody would like to contact me separately, I do feel that I should have taken the offer to make it a double meeting before. So if anybody feels the urge to hit me up or have any more questions, or anybody, especially volunteers, wants to talk a little bit longer, just know that I'm entirely available.
Excellent. Would you all please thank Melanie Dawn, everyone?
Thanks, Melanie.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much.
Blessings.
Thank you.
Melanie. Very powerful, Melanie. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.